In the heart of the American justice system lies a place enveloped in iron bars and the heavy silence of despair, death row. Within these walls, time drips slowly, every tick of the clock punctuating the stark reality of lives hanging in the balance. Behind the gray walls of San Quentin, the air is thick with a mix of anxiety and resignation, a place where hope is but a distant whisper. Guardians of this somber existence are the correctional officers, a tough breed hardened by years patrolling the bleak corridors. Among them, two men stood out, high school friends turned colleagues, Eric Donovan and Mike Reynolds. The job had changed them, drawing them into an abyss of ethical ambiguities and moral gray areas. Donovan, who boasted a strong physique and an air of confidence, wore the badge of authority like a second skin. Reynolds, leaner and quieter, often operated in the background, observing and analyzing with an uncanny attention to detail. The two formed a bond over their shared experiences, peppered with late-night conversations about life, law, and the sharp edge of morality. As they walked through the concrete maze of death row, familiar faces looked up at them, some with desperate eyes, others with an unsettling calm. It was here, within this murky environment, that a seed of complicity was planted, a feeling that perhaps there were ways to bend the rules, ways to connect with the very individuals they were sworn to keep at bay. Muffled echoes of despair often mingled with tense conversations as inmates exchanged furtive glances, a palpable energy shimmering in the air. In this charged atmosphere, the idea of escape transformed from mere fantasy to a dangerous game, a possibility that both Donovan and Reynolds secretly fostered while grappling with the reality of their profession. Within the claustrophobic confines of their uniforms, their growing empathy for the men behind bars began twisting into something darker. It revealed itself one evening, during a routine interaction where an inmate spoke of freedom with a sparkle in his eye, a light so infectious it reached even the guarded heart of Donovan. Hours turned into whispers and whispers turned into calculations. Could they actually orchestrate a breakout? Both men began to entertain the notion, each step dragging them deeper into a complex web of choices that would change their lives and the lives of the inmates forever. As weeks unfolded, the camaraderie between Donovan and Reynolds seeped into the dangerous waters of conspiracy. It was during a mundane shift change that they solidified their pact, the space between them charged with unspoken intensity. They found themselves huddled together, eyes darting toward the barred windows, plotting routes and gathering supplies, all under the watchful gaze of the towering walls. They operated under a shroud of anonymity, seeking out inmates who expressed desires of escape. It was a delicate dance, peppered with conversations laden with double meanings and veiled intentions. The financial lure of danger tugged at Donovan and Reynolds, each risking their careers and futures for fleeting affections and vivid dreams. During one particular night shift, a soft knock resounded against the barred door, breaking the monotony of routine. John Smith, an inmate known for his cunning charm, leaned against the cold metal, healthily tired but focused. "We could use some help, you've got the means to get me out of here." His words were an intoxicating mix of desperation and allure, igniting something primal in the men. After ensuring no one else was watching, Donovan and Reynolds began inching closer to the edge of morality. They started to smuggle out equipment, tools hidden in their uniforms, small items that could facilitate an escape. The taste of rebellion was exhilarating, intoxicating, even as though they had decided to rewrite the rules of their bleak existence. The thrill of secrecy intertwined with the gravity of their decisions, but sometimes silence can be more deadly than any sound. Echoes of the past haunted them, whispers of colleagues and loved ones flipping through their minds. Still, the duo pressed on, lured by the idea that they were playing a higher role in the unfolding tragedy of lives sentenced to darkness. Days turned into nights, and each passing moment drew them deeper into a precarious game of cat and mouse where their very identities were strained, and the weight of their choices began to overshadow their intentions. As rumors of a massive escape began circulating among inmates, tension gripped the prison like an iron vice. Donovan and Reynolds, now embroiled in their web of subterfuge, had revealed a piece of their plan to a select few inmates, those they felt could be trusted. The thrill turned electric, mingling with the stench of fear and desperation within the prison walls. The critical night arrived, cloaked in shadow and uncertainty. Donovan felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he donned his uniform, the familiar weight now laden with the knowledge of what he was about to do. In his mind, he rationalized that they were offering a second chance, a lifeline for those condemned to die trapped within their pasts. Under the cover of darkness, the prison descended into an eerie tranquility marked by the occasional howl of wind against the steel. As they slipped into the shadows, Donovan's pulse quickened. He led the ensemble into areas that had been planned meticulously. In that moment, there was no longer a boundary between guard and inmate, only men and their visceral yearnings for freedom. Outside the barred walls, the promise of escape shimmered like a mirage, tantalizing and distant. With tools smuggled under the guise of duty, they maneuvered through corridors, hearts racing like runaway trains. As they reached a previously identified exit, adrenaline surged and their breaths mingled in the tension. Freedom lay within reach. Panic struck as alarms suddenly blared, shattering the quiet night. They were discovered. Chaos erupted. Donovan's world spiraled into disarray. With footsteps pounding behind them, confusion and regret danced in the deranged rhythm of survival. The sound of shouting echoed endlessly, swirling into the darkness as guards chased after them, the illusion of safety now shattered. In a stunning twist of fate, several inmates found their way out amidst the pandemonium. One by one, faces lit with wild exhilaration merged into the night, creeping toward the edges of the unknown. And for Donovan and Reynolds, the lines separating law from lawlessness blurred into a haze of desperation and betrayal, leaving only remnants of a life they once knew. The guillotine of consequences hung starkly in the air, waiting patient and gray. The days rushed forward like a gale, chaos engulfing the prison. What began as a simple plan had unraveled into a whirlwind of accusations, investigations, and relentless scrutiny. It wasn't long before the names Eric Donovan and Mike Reynolds became synonymous with scandal. Guards turned participants in a harrowing tale marked by betrayal and lost humanity. As the fallout erupted, internal investigations ripped through the prison like a storm, unearthing hidden documents, phone records, and surveillance footage that depicted a darker narrative concealed beneath the veneer of order. The walls that once felt impenetrable now echoed with resentment and uncertainty, old loyalties shattered as whispers entwined with fear. Donovan and Reynolds were both placed on administrative leave, their positions entirely compromised. Legal proceedings loomed large, overshadowing friendships and lives they swore to protect. Friends became foes, codependency twisted into accusations, each guard pointing towards the other in desperate attempts to safeguard their fragile lives. In countless interviews, the word betrayal surfaced relentlessly. You could feel the weight of their choices creeping into the seams of every narrative. They attempted to portray themselves as mere facilitators caught in an unforeseen predicament, swayed by emotions. Yet, deep down, echoes of their complicity reverberated louder than any defense could withstand. Survivors of the escape, those who had once sought freedom, were apprehended swiftly as law descended upon them like a looming tidal wave. Some were charged with fleeing justice. To them, the escalation felt inevitable. In the tragic aftermath, lives teetered at the edge of redemption and despair, a haunting reminder of dreams perishing in the tangled mess of human desires. And still, beneath the media frenzy and political machinations, echoes of vulnerability weaved themselves into the stories of Donovan and Reynolds. Once guardians of firm resolve, both men were left adrift in a world of shadows that felt infinitely colder. They'd wandered too close to the abyss. Years later, after everything faded into the sterile anecdotes of the past, stories persisted, cautionary tales about the men who wore the badge but chose silence over duty. And as the prison restarts its exhausting cycle, a chilling truth loomed. Echoing beneath every click of a cell door was a fundamental lesson learned, one etched permanently in the conscience of those who tread the delicate line between right and wrong. Years passed within the echoing walls of San Quentin, a place eternally entwined with stories of both despair and fleeting freedom. The pulse of the prison continued, the cycle unyielding as souls passed through the unforgiving machinery of justice. The aftermath of the escape left a stain that seeped deep into the fabric of this world, a whispering ghost haunting the guards and inmates alike. Donovan and Reynolds faced a harsh reckoning, stripped of their badges and placed on trial. What had been a thrilling descent into chaos had morphed into a nightmare where moral lines blurred into the fog of complicity. In courtrooms where echoes of their pasts played out, their lives were laid bare before juries and onlookers, each moment packed with tension thicker than any prison wall. Donovan, once a man of authority, now struggled against the weight of his choices. With each day that unfolded in court, he sank deeper into regret. The spark of rebellion he had felt was now replaced with a somber understanding of consequences. In the quiet moments between testimonies, he revisited the faces of the inmates he had once supported. Were they victims or predators? The questions gnawed at him, eroding his once steadfast beliefs about justice and duty. Reynolds, on the other hand, retreated into himself, the spark in his eyes dulled. He had spent years dressing his dreams of freedom with a cloak of purpose, but now those dreams were a jagged reflection of his actions. He often found his thoughts spiraling toward lost opportunities, friends, family, and the simple, untainted moments he once took for granted before he stepped too far into the abyss. In the courtroom, testimonies unfurled like ragged flags in a swirling storm. Former inmates spoke of the escape, their words spinning tales of chaos and fleeting exhilaration. "We just wanted a chance," one man declared, his voice quaking under the weight of his memories. "You opened the door and we ran, we had to try." And while their words stirred the responses of empathy, the prosecution remained ruthless. Each grim detail wound tightly around both Donovan and Reynolds, suffocating their pleas for understanding and painting them instead as conspirators in a chaotic plot to betray the very institutions sworn to protect society. The trial became a public spectacle, one that gripped the community and reached into the deepest corners of the news cycle. Talk shows debated the morality of their actions, debating the thin line between compassion and complicity. In interviews, former guards offered their thoughts on betrayal. "It's easy to judge from the outside," one stated, resigned. "But we were all in it together until it was. They crossed a line we were warned about." Days turned into weeks, the courtroom a theater of loss and agony painted with aspirations turned ash. As closing arguments emerged, the air grew thick with despair. Donovan remembered the glances exchanged in the shadows, the moments when he thought he could become a hero in a twisted drama, only to find himself trapped in a far darker narrative. The verdict finally arrived, wrapping them in silence as it was read aloud, leaving Donovan and Reynolds with heavy hearts. Guilty on multiple counts including conspiracy and endangerment, the sentence laid heavy on both men, years behind bars. Their dreams of redemption had dissolved, leaving them entangled in a web spun of choices made in transient darkness. In the months that followed, both men were relocated to different facilities. Separated by the harsh realities of their actions, they found themselves submerged in the very system they once patrolled. Donovan, in a maximum security prison, felt the confines of his new life close in on him, the bars scarred with the remnants of lost days. Here the weight of his decisions was felt in every echoing clang of the cell doors, each reverberation serving as a grim reminder of the lives irrevocably altered. Reynolds landed in a facility known for its strict regime, faced with the bitterness of betrayal. Everywhere he turned, he felt the enmity of fellow inmates and guards alike. The isolation bore down on him, gnawing at the ashes of his own ambitions. Within the walls, whispers followed him, rumors pounding against his skull like a relentless drum. He became the subject of internal conversations, an almost tragic figure lost in the brutal anarchy of incarceration. Through it all, they both grappled with an unshakable question: was there a path back to any semblance of redemption? Weeks turned into months, and Donovan, now a prisoner, often found himself revisiting the lives he touched, both on the rows of death and within the shadows of power. He began to wonder if escape from his own mind was possible, or if he was doomed to dwell in perpetual remorse. During a particularly stark winter night, he sat alone in his cell, writing letters to the inmates he had once associated with during his time as a guard. These letters were not just an act of penance, they were an attempt to strip away the chains of guilt. "I offered a way that should never have been," he wrote, his pen trembling in the dim light. "For that I am sorry." Meanwhile, Reynolds channeled his chaotic thoughts into a journal, pages filled with reflections on his shared history with Donovan. He articulated their reckless descent into a labyrinthine web of choices. Each line was imbued with the realization that they had not only betrayed their oaths but also the ideals of forgiveness and second chances they had once upheld. Outside their walls, the world was forging ahead. The media coverage had simmered down, but the disgrace spread a ripple effect through the community, forcing it to confront its own assumptions about the system. Forums hosted conversations about prison reform, while the uprising cries for compassion within a punitive society found voice. The turn of events drew connections between personal failings and systemic issues, unraveling the threads of complicity that often stitched dangerous expectations into the fabric of law enforcement. Both men, in their secluded existence, began to recognize that their actions echoed far beyond themselves, reverberating within the crucial dialogues forming around justice and redemption. Years into their sentences, both Eric Donovan and Mike Reynolds were changed men, shadows of their former selves, grappling with their guilt and the regrets that enveloped them. In the silence of confinement, moments of self-reflection offered painful glimpses into who they had once been and what they had lost. For Donovan, a newfound sense of purpose began to emerge amid the desolation. He launched an initiative within his facility, striving to make amends in whatever small ways he could. He found solace in teaching reading and writing to other inmates, helping them piece together fragments of their narratives, one lesson at a time. The act of turning pain into knowledge became a bitter irony. He was once a keeper of the keys, but now he sought to unlock potential instead of suppressing it. Reynolds, too, emerged from the depths of self-pity. With each passing year, the chains of despair gradually disintegrated, replaced by an understanding of his own humanity. In small, unexpected moments, he found threads of forgiveness for himself and for those he may have harmed. He took up gardening in the prison yard, nurturing fragile plants, finding healing in the act of growth. As Donovan's and Reynolds' paths converged once more in a strange twist of fate facilitated by a reformation program aimed at bridging stories of past actions, both men found themselves seated across from each other for the first time in years. It wasn't just a reunion, it was a reckoning, a moment steeped in solemn understanding and shared emotions. The conversations were poignant and laced with uncertainty but marked by tentative hope. They shared their journeys, the ideas of forgiveness they had come to embrace, and the painful realizations that had since unfolded. Neither man was the same, the shadows of their past now merged with lessons of resilience and compassion. In sharing their stories with others, Donovan and Reynolds birthed a project aimed at shining a light on the experiences of both guards and inmates, a beacon illuminating the complexities of choice, empathy, and the sheer unpredictability of the human heart. Through the momentum of these discussions, they sparked conversations among their fellow inmates and even with the prison administration. A fragility had emerged, a recognition that beneath the labels of convict and guard lay shared humanity. In time, they both were granted the chance to speak at community forums, recounting their journeys with honesty and candor. They shared their darkest moments but also their journeys toward healing, illustrating the intricate dance of conscience and accountability. Their stories echoed far beyond the confines of the prison, reverberating through the hearts of those who needed to hear them most, those still grappling with their choices and moments of lost clarity. They stood as living testaments that even in the deepest shadows there existed glimmers of hope waiting to emerge. Amid the bars and broken stories, they learned to rise above despair and instill the seeds of redemption, recognizing, in the end, that the light of humanity could often shine brightest against the backdrop of darkness. As the years dripped away like sand through an hourglass, Donovan and Reynolds continued to grow, not only as men but as advocates for change. Their relationship solidified through shared redemption work, evolving from former comrades in crime to partners in advocacy. They began to articulate a vision, a prison model built on rehabilitation rather than mere punishment, a dream that felt both ambitious and hopelessly idealistic within the oppressive walls surrounding them. With the prison administration recognizing the impact of their initiative, they were granted opportunities for further engagement with the outside community. Through video conferences, Donovan and Reynolds connected with educational institutions, sparking discussions about criminal justice reform and the often overlooked stories of those who fell through the cracks of the system. Each interaction opened new doors and created an avenue to reach troubled youths, warning them against the seductive allure of crime while illustrating how choices can lead down dismal paths, but also toward newfound hope. Their words resonated with those who had been neglected, providing a rare voice of experience and understanding. Meanwhile, the reform movement outside the prison continued to build momentum, propelled by changing societal attitudes toward justice. Grassroots organizations were demanding an overhaul of punitive practices, advocating for systems that demanded accountability while actively nurturing rehabilitation. Donovan and Reynolds sought to contribute their voices to these discussions, reclaiming their narratives as part of a larger call for compassion. Behind bars, they continued to cultivate their impromptu classroom environment, with Donovan teaching writing workshops that inspired inmates to chronicle their stories, while Reynolds engaged them in discussions about emotional health and conflict resolution. Their bond deepened through these shared moments of vulnerability, allowing them to process their regrets while illuminating the potential for growth. Time passed, slowly transforming their sentences into reflections. The pain of the past weaved its way through their conversations, but each day felt lighter. Groups of inmates began to follow their example, forming support networks focused on facing personal demons and aspirations for a future beyond walls. As they penned letters advocating for prisoners' rights, drafted proposals for educational programs, and even collected initiatives in collaboration with local universities, their influence expanded beyond the confines of the prison. They became unlikely spokespersons, lending their voices to an evolving dialogue about justice, accountability, and humanity. Months turned into years and eventually the day of reckoning approached. Donovan's and Reynolds' sentences had drawn to a close, the culmination of years marked by transformation and growth within. As their release date drew near, an undercurrent of hope intertwined with anxiety surged through them. On the morning of their release, the cold air felt electric with both anticipation and trepidation. They had spent so long behind the razor wire that the thought of freedom felt almost surreal, a dizzying mirage creeping closer. The day dawned bright, illuminating a world that had moved on without them, yet they were determined to step into it forever changed. As they exited the gates, the sunlight warmed their faces, washing away years of confinement and uncertainty. Onlookers were mere shadows, but they held their heads high, meeting the world with cautious optimism. Before stepping into the new chapter of their lives, they exchanged promises, vows of support, and a commitment to continue advocating for change together. The first taste of freedom was bittersweet. The temptation to slip back into the familiar comfort of isolation nagged at them. But they pressed on, knowing they had each other to rely on, a bond forged in the fires of their mistakes. With every step into the open air, they carried the weight of their past, a creeping awareness of how fragile their redemption was. Their mission was twofold: to heal within themselves and to share the lessons they had learned with others who would listen. They sought refuge at a local nonprofit organization focused on helping former inmates reintegrate into society. The organization had one central goal: a dedicated mission to break the vicious cycle of incarceration by providing resources and opportunities for those who had previously stumbled. In the midst of the vibrant chaos, Donovan and Reynolds found solace. Here, they began sharing their story, creating workshops that showed how enmeshed stories of past failures could carve pathways for transformation. They became mentors, advocating for the voiceless while instilling a tangible sense of hope in those caught in cycles of despair. Months turned into a year, and a new path unfolded for both men. From the darkest depths of their pasts, they began to recognize their ability to foster hope amidst the uncertainty. They gathered support from local businesses and community members, forming partnerships that would supply employment opportunities for others seeking to reclaim their lives. Donovan initiated a program connecting local retailers with job-seeking former inmates. Reynolds created mentorship opportunities focused on emotional intelligence and resilience, understanding that many needed someone who understood their struggles. Their names began to carry weight, a newfound reputation in the community emerged, both plucked from the vine of regret. The ripple effect began to take shape. Their workshops transformed lives. Individuals who once saw no way out now found glimmers of possibility, reinvigorating their dreams. Former inmates who stepped into the sunlight began to find livelihoods and purpose, hitting the reset button on their lives due to the advocacy and guidance Donovan and Reynolds offered. As they stood before a room full of eager faces, Reynolds spoke with deep emotion. "You all have the power to reshape your stories. Don't let your past define you. We survived the shadows to stand here today, and you can too." The room buzzed with anticipation as those words echoed in the space, igniting sparks of hope in hearts desperate for change. Years passed, and as time continued its relentless march forward, their unwavering dedication led them to unexpected encounters. Donovan reunited with members of the community he had once patrolled, unexpectedly forming friendships built on understanding, the walls of mistrust beginning to crumble. Reynolds met with youth in schools, forming programs with educators that actively addressed the complexities of choices, consequences, and the paths to recovery from adversity. They became a living bridge between communities, offering laughter and vulnerability while engaging with students who needed to hear their truths. With their transformations now serving as a source of inspiration for many, both men continued their work tirelessly, never losing sight of the sacrifices made along their journeys. The lessons learned were not mere whispers; they became life's anthems resonating through the fabric of society. In the late afternoon light one day, both men found themselves seated in a community hall, the air filled with murmurs and laughter. Local families gathered for a mentorship event, a space for connection and healing created to encourage openness about struggles. As Donovan began to speak, memories of his past flitted through his mind, but now they felt like stepping stones rather than chains. "The road can be long and arduous," he began, eyes scanning the room filled with earnest faces. "But by sharing our stories, we can break the silence. Let's take steps toward understanding, toward letting go and growing together." Reynolds added, "We're not just here to tell you what to do, we're here to show you we're standing beside you. We've been in these waters and together we can learn to navigate them." As the event unfolded, hope danced on the air, voices intertwining as lives intersected and futures brightened. Donovan and Reynolds, once parts of a broken narrative, had woven themselves into a tapestry of hope, strength, and resilience. Years later, reflecting back on their journeys, they understood that the choices they had made shaped paths not just for themselves, but for many, and therein lay the truth they carried with them. Even after dipping into darkness, the possibility of stepping into the light remained ever present. Through every workshop, every mentorship, every shared story, redemption thrived, echoing through generations, a reminder that in the haunting shadows of despair, glimmers of hope endure, ever resilient in the pursuit of second chances. As Donovan and Reynolds stepped onto the stage, the warmth of the spotlight enveloped them, mingling with the palpable energy radiating from the audience. Each familiar face reflected hope and possibility, a living testament to the struggles they had all overcome. They glanced at one another, moments of shared understanding flashing between them. The weight of their pasts no longer felt heavy. Instead, it had transformed into a foundation on which they could build something enduring. They were not just survivors, they were architects of change. In their journey, they had unraveled the notion that redemption was a solitary path. It was, in fact, a collective endeavor nurtured by compassion, forgiveness, and resilience. As Donovan spoke, his voice resonated with authenticity. This journey isn't defined by our mistakes but by our capacity to learn and to nurture growth. His words wove through the crowd, infusing the space with determination. Reynolds followed, sharing stories of those who had found their footing after stumbling through life's uncertainties, illustrating the profound truth that everyone, no matter their past, holds the power to change their story. As the evening unfolded, laughter mixed with tears, narratives intertwined, and connections deepened. The room buzzed with a sense of possibility. Children and adults alike absorbed the lessons hanging in the air like stars illuminating a night sky. Together, they shared not only their tales of hardship but the delicate, fragile beauty of rebuilding not just lives but communities. Each story echoed with the reminder that darkness does not have to define one's existence. It can merely inform the journey toward light. In the warmth of understanding, they found solace, each movement resonating like a drumbeat in the depths of their souls. The threads of their lives intertwined, each shared moment revealing the profound truth that healing happens not in isolation but in the collective embrace of our shared humanity. As the evening drew to a close, the applause rang out, a crescendo of hope reverberating through every corner of the room. Smiles replaced frowns, shadows lifted, and a vibrant tapestry of possibility shimmered in the hearts of all present. In that moment, Donovan and Reynolds stood not as guards or inmates, but as proud members of a community defined by its willingness to embrace second chances and foster new beginnings. The depth of their transformation echoed far beyond the event itself, seeping into the fabric of society. In every corner of the world, stories of redemption continue to unfold, rippling outward, reminding all that even amidst darkness, light will always seek to prevail. Together, they forged a legacy that served as both warning and beacon. In the dance between shadows and light, the human spirit remains endlessly resilient, always searching for the path home.